All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Going to give a quick moment here for people to sign in, but we are going to get started pretty quickly because we have a lot planned for today. So just want to try to fit in as best we can. So my name is Tasha Poinsett. I am the Colorado director of the Healing Advocacy Fund, which is a nonprofit whose mission is to protect and expand safe, legal, state-regulated access to psychedelic healing for all who need it. Joining me on the call today are Kevin Matthews, who was co-proponent of Proposition 122, Colorado's Natural Medicine Health Act, as well as attorney Josh Capel, who's founding partner at the law firm Vicente and co-drafter of Proposition 122, the Natural Medicine Health Act. We also have with us Dr. Wael Garris, an internal medicine physician, MAPS-trained therapist, and co-principal investigator on the phase 3 clinical trials of MDMA-assisted therapies for PTSD. And we are so happy to have our 4 speakers today who are going to be sharing their stories: Joe, Tim, Celeste, and Janet, as well as Vincent Atchity, Executive Director of Mental Health Colorado. And I am going to hand it over to Vincent to kick us off.
Thanks so much, Tasha. Welcome everybody to the second webinar in our 4-part series on psychedelic medicines for mental health. Mental Health Colorado is a nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy organization working to promote healthier minds across the lifespan for all Coloradans. Our national initiative, Care Not Cuffs, champions efforts to disentangle mental health and criminal justice. We've been working in Colorado for 70 years. We're so excited and proud to be hosting this groundbreaking webinar series in partnership with the Healing Advocacy Fund, and we were inspired and encouraged by the passage of Colorado's National Medicines Act of 2022. As the state's leading consumer advocacy organization for mental health, we wholly support and can corroborate the declarations prefacing that historic act. Colorado's current approach to mental health has failed to fulfill its promise. Coloradans deserve more tools to address mental health issues, including approaches such as natural medicines that are grounded in treatment, recovery, health, and wellness, rather than in criminalization, suffering, and punishment. Coloradans are experiencing problematic mental health issues, including but not limited to suicidality, addiction, depression, and anxiety. An extensive and growing body of research is advancing to support the efficacy of natural medicines combined with therapy as treatment for depression, anxiety, substance use disorders, end-of-life distress, and other conditions. And finally, natural medicines have been used safely for millennia by cultures for healing. Dr. William Richards, the psychologist in the psychiatry department of the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine Bayview Medical Center, who launched the rebirth of psilocybin research in 1999 after a 22-year period of dormancy in the United States, is quoted as follows by Michael Pollan in How to Change Your Mind. I can vividly remember the first session I ran after that long 22-year hiatus. This guy is lying on the couch with tears streaming down his face, and I'm thinking how absolutely beautiful and meaningful this experience is, how sacred. How can this ever have been illegal? It's as if we made entering Gothic cathedrals illegal, or museums, or sunsets. Mental Health Colorado's mission is pro-human and pro-planet. It's a tragic scandal that humans have been cut off from natural medicines due to harmful and discriminatory laws. We hope that today's speakers will inspire safe and transformative therapeutic practice, and we hope that other states will soon follow Colorado and Oregon in similarly liberating the power of the planet in support of improved human health and well-being. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Vincent. I had not heard that quote. That's really powerful. On the last call, we described in some detail Colorado's regulated access model for psilocybin mushrooms, which, as a reminder, will require support from a trained and licensed facilitator before, during, and after the psychedelic experience with mushrooms. The state is working to define the rules for that regulated access program, which will launch in early 2025. And we've gotten some questions since the last call specifically about microdosing or using smaller amounts of psilocybin. So just to address that directly, the law itself isn't specifically geared towards microdosing because of that requirement of somebody being present throughout the psychedelic experience. There's no requirement for it to be a higher dose, but it is modeled after the clinical trials, which have primarily used moderate to high doses. So we can touch a little bit more on that if it comes up in the Q&A. But since on this call, we're going to hear personal stories from Coloradans about their relationship and experience with psychedelic medicines and the process of healing and recovery, I want to share another important component of Colorado's law that we didn't touch on as much in the last session. So in addition to directing the state to establish a regulated therapeutic model, Proposition 122 also removed criminal penalties for the personal use of 4 naturally occurring psychedelic medicines, including psilocybin-containing mushrooms for adults 21 and over. Personal use includes possession, use on private property, cultivation, and sharing of these medicines. The 4 natural medicines included are psilocybin mushrooms, which psilocybin mushrooms contain both psilocybin and psilocin, so both are decriminalized, as well as DMT, which is an ingredient in ayahuasca, ibogaine, and mescaline, if not derived from peyote. In this presentation, we'll mostly focus on psilocybin mushrooms, since Colorado is initially creating a regulated access program only for mushrooms. However, each of the other 3 are sacred medicines within indigenous cultures in the Americas and Africa, and have also been studied within the scientific literature, showing great potential to support healing. I mentioned this because in one of the presentations, you'll see reference to the other medicines. So I want to be clear that they are decriminalized in Colorado, but will not, at least initially, be included for regulated access in the same way as psilocybin mushrooms. Decriminalization of personal use in Colorado has created opportunities for us to speak more openly about our experiences with psychedelics, both positive and negative, which has increased opportunities for collective learning so that we can all make safer choices. And thinking about how to introduce our panelists today, primarily I want to, really let them speak for themselves. But there's actually a quote from our last webinar that really spoke to me. It's from Dr. Matt Johnson, who graciously joined us at the last session. And I asked him to dig in a little bit more about how we're seeing sort of these long-term positive benefits and changes in many cases from just a few, maybe 1 to 3 sessions with psilocybin. And what he said was, people learn things. They have a story to tell you. They start changing the way they're thinking and behaving in their everyday lives, and that has a feed forward into their lives. And I thought that that's just a great way to introduce a set of 4 stories. And what I really want to share here is for those who are going to be sharing their stories, the 4 of you, that there is no right story here. So I want to take off the pressure. Your story is the story. You are in the process. And I think the greatest disservice we could do to the audience would be to imply that there is some sort of formula for healing in relationship with psychedelics. I think we all know that that's not true. So really, we're just here to hear your voices. There is learning in your experience, in your process, in your journey. And I want to really deeply thank you for choosing to join us, because I believe that it takes a lot of courage to come forward and share, as you've chosen to do. And I feel that we've almost, asked you to decipher in a way the indecipherable. So what you have for us, we come here open to hear it, and just thank you. So with that, I want to hand it over to Celeste.
Thank you, Tasha, and thank you for such a beautiful intro. So my name is Celeste, and today I'm going to be talking about the effect that psychedelics had on my health, what I wish I knew before exploring psychedelics, and the lessons that I learned from my experiences. So when I was 15, I started drinking almost immediately, very heavily and never responsibly to self-medicate severe depression and anxiety. About a decade later, I would be diagnosed with severe alcohol use disorder. I was taking in about 35, 40 drinks a week. And up to that point, nothing had worked for me. I tried talk therapy and medication, and things just continued to spiral. At that point, I was in the middle of my doctorate, so I was basically working around the clock. And so the intensive inpatient program that was recommended for me also wasn't going to work for me. Things were getting very serious. I knew things needed to change and I had to find some answers. I started reading about studies on LSD done in alcoholics back in the 60s, of all places, on Reddit. And from there, I read generally positive effects that LSD was helping people quit and cut back. And with that little bit of education, I was open to the experience. So my first experience with LSD was with my partner at the time. There was no preparation or intention, definitely no real thought given to set and setting, and I certainly didn't know what integration was at that time. The only intention was to watch Big Trouble in Little China, and to this day, I still don't know how that movie ends because I was in the next room from the outside looking in, essentially having a full-on crisis, but on the inside and getting down to the root of my alcoholism and developing an understanding of what it would take to get to where I am today, which is 4 years alcohol-free. And the key to that was self-love. So that's all a lot easier said than done. There was a lot of trial and error, a lot of missteps along the way. I think it was always going to be an uphill battle just because of how severe things had gotten. And I think with access to education, resources, a trusted guide, group, or confidant, that would have made all the difference, and it would have made for a much smoother ride. My life now as compared to then, I always felt physically and mentally sick. My mind-body connection was completely severed. Now I am genuinely happy and at ease. I feel good in my body, and I'm, interested in developing that connection even further. Before, I had no identity without alcohol. I couldn't imagine my life without it. And now there's been a total mindset shift. I see alcohol as poison, and I love and care about myself too much to poison myself any longer. Before, I also had the narrowest self-view. The only thing that mattered was that next drink. And now I have developed interests that nourish me, essentially creating a system that shows myself worthiness and love. And from that, I've developed a life so rich and full that alcohol has no place anywhere in it. If there's one thing that I'd like to leave you all with today, it's that as dangerous as people perceive these compounds to be, it's more dangerous to perpetuate silence and stigma, and it's even more dangerous to withhold accessible information from the public and prevent people from making their own informed decisions. The last thing that I want to share is my father ended up passing away this last year from severe complications of cirrhosis. We watched his brother go the same way, and they watched their father also die from cirrhosis of the liver. I can't express in words what it means to be here today, sharing this with you all, and knowing that that ended with me, and that won't be my future, and that would not have been possible without psychedelics.
Wow, thank you so much, Celeste, for sharing that. It's very moving. In psychedelic therapies, there's an emphasis on the inner healing capacity that exists within each of us in relationship with ourselves and our communities. And I see you embodying that in so many beautiful ways as you've moved through the challenges before you. So just thank you so much for being here and for sharing that. I now want to invite Janet to share her story.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. First, I want to apologize for having to do this anonymously. As excited as I am to share my stories of healing through psychedelics on this webinar, namely psilocybin, I feel as though it's not the right time to connect my likeness on the internet. Like all of us here today, there's so much to our personal story. All the parts of my story are so deeply connected, and I'm hoping that comes across today. While I've had a history with psychedelics, I didn't start intentionally using them for healing until more recently in life. Though I struggled with anxiety throughout my life and was in and out of therapy, about a year after the birth of my third child, I was at a very low point and was prescribed anti-anxiety medication to deal with the day-to-day. Though this did work to keep me more relaxed and happier, I made it very clear to my psychiatrist that this was not a long-term solution for me. I have always preferred to live my life as naturally and as I possibly could, and felt as though I wanted to find a better way around the feelings I had. I took them for about a year, got through some trying times like job transitions and moving states, and decided it was time to wean. The weaning process was terrible, but I made it through. The only issue was that I was back to square one, feeling anxious, a little bit depressed, and not sure what to do about it all. So I started therapy again. While it had worked in the past, for some reason, I felt like I wasn't getting anywhere. I was at a standstill, and I felt like I needed something that went deeper. I started diving into alternatives, hypnosis, meditation, podcasts, energy healing books. I literally took in everything I possibly could. Around that time, I actually like to call it divine timing, I came across a healer that really resonated with me and used psilocybin in ceremony to help heal people. I figured, what do I have to lose? I've done mushrooms before. This time I just have to put some intention around it. It was cathartic just to figure out what my intentions were, but the main one was just to feel less anxious. I wanted to feel an intense gratitude for what was in my personal sphere, my loving husband, my beautiful children, and the life that I had. I was, of course, anxious about the ceremony. Actually, I was anxious about being anxious about the ceremony. Even though there was about 10 of us, I felt really emotionally held by my facilitator, who even physically helped me during really rough times. I processed so much in the hours I spent in this journey that I came out and never went back to therapy. There was, however, one really big thing that came up, the thing that never occurred to me that needed work, but was always deep inside of me and formed a big piece of my identity: race. Until about 5 years old, I was the child of a single mother, a single Black immigrant mother who was on welfare for a brief period of time, who was putting herself through medical school with no support, no help with her young child, and everyone telling her that she should quit because she would never make it. She never quit. She worked so hard, which in retrospect I can see, but I never knew as a child. I was just a happy girl that went with her to classes when I couldn't be left with the neighbor upstairs. She was and always has showed up for me in so many ways, and I'll forever be grateful and thankful to her for proving to me that anyone can do anything, even with every odds stacked up against them. As a first-generation immigrant, my mother and I were physically disconnected from her side of the family. We would make yearly trips to visit our family in the Caribbean, and while we did have some family in the United States, I lacked a true connection to them as well. I barely knew and still don't really know my aunts, uncles, and cousins. I never thought much of this as a child. I just cherished those trips back home to St. Lucia, seeing and smelling my grandmother and letting her spoil me with fresh West Indian food and so much love. I always felt deeply connected to her, even with the distance. But I really had no connection to the Black side of my heritage or my culture, except for the very strict rules that come with it. When I was 5, she met my stepfather, a white physician who loved children. He was so fun to be with and loved spending time with me. He taught me about what he knew and enjoyed from his life experiences, things like skiing and travel. It was perfect. We were a happy little family of 3, which turned to 4 with the birth of my brother when I was about 10 years old. I have really fond memories of us spending time with his big Italian family, who accepted myself and my mother without question. In fact, they were so accepting that our extended family called ourselves the United Colors of Benetton. Yes, I really know I'm dating myself here for anyone out there who knows what the United Colors of Benetton is. My cousins are Spanish, Korean, Swedish. We have everything. I'd always felt so freeing to be with this mix of people. No one cared about color. There was just love, tons of activities, and lots of food. Unfortunately, this utopia is not the real world, or at least not my real world. In the real world, everyone sees color, particularly in middle school and high school. We were fortunate enough with 2 physicians to live in a really nice house in a nice part of town, and I was able to attend the best schools. But as a middle schooler and high schooler, while I was generally liked, I never fit in. No one knew what to do with me. I lived in the white part of town and had white friends, but I also had Black friends. I say friends in air quotes because some were friends, but most just made fun of me for not being Black enough. I was an Oreo. I was never able to live this down. and this label has stuck with me my entire life. I sat with my white friends at lunch while the Black people made fun of me, but I also never quite fit in with the white people as well. While I felt like those kids were more accepting of me, their parents were not as accepting as they were. I felt like they thought I was a bad influence, even though I was a star student and fully engaged in extracurriculars like voice and volleyball. Going to their houses to hang out just felt a little awkward. I just knew they didn't like me, but I couldn't figure out why. I rationalized and I told myself that I was just nervous because they were adults. I remember one friend of mine, every time I walked into her house, her father looked at me sternly and with disdain. It was clear that I was not a good enough choice to spend time with his daughter. Now that I'm older and I have my own children, I realize that a lot of white adults have this issue. They want their friends to have diverse friends, so they say, but they don't feel comfortable with that really because they can't figure out how to interact with the Black parent. No matter how educated I am, how similar I am to them, even the fact that my husband is white, it doesn't matter. They just don't know how. Now, I'm not saying that they don't want to. I'm just saying they don't know how to. I have found that my experiences with psychedelics have helped me cope with and unravel the years of trauma and anxiety that I've had around being myself in situations where I don't physically fit in. Through psychedelics, I have been able to see the feelings on the inside and out, get deep into them, find a way around them, and realize that while these issues have affected me, they don't define me, nor do they define my future. The biggest connection that I've made in psychedelic journey is that I'm a bridge for these races, and I always have been. I've been called to be this person, and in my choices of marrying a white man and living in Colorado, I've brought my children along with me for this ride. So if you can imagine a bridge, it's always under a lot of pressure. There's a remarkable amount of weight that it can hold, but where does all the weight go? It gets absorbed. As a person, the bridge needs a release of all that energy, which psychedelics have helped me achieve. They've helped me deal with the day-to-day and the fact that unfortunately in this country, we aren't out at the place we all need to be. My experiences with psychedelics allow me to shoulder this burden and allow me to be my authentic mixed race self. So to connect the two parts of my story, while I do think that some of the anxiety may just be in my genetics, I am confident that another part of this is in relation to race and the trauma I had growing up not fitting in. I was subject to low-level anxiety from childhood about my identity. I have felt anxious and not good enough in situations simply because I'm ethnically different. Through psychedelics, I have been able to experience parts of myself that I never knew existed and true freedom.
Thank you so much, Janet, for joining us and for sharing your story. And for both you and Celeste, it brings me a lot of joy to be able to witness where you're at in this moment and all that's to come next for you. So in structuring this session, we wanted to be sure to weave in research throughout because it's important to recognize that while these stories are profound and personal, they are not isolated. So I want to hand it over to Dr. Garris and Celeste to speak a little bit to what we're seeing in the research in relationship to substance use and psychedelics.
Okay, thank you, Tasha. I think it's good to advance to the next slide. So I think one of the main points that I wanted to make was that using psychedelics to treat substance use disorders or addiction is not new, but it's definitely something that there's active research on learning more about, and specifically learning more about the mechanisms. And what's coming to light now is that serotonin acting psychedelics, or the classical psychedelics, act at multiple points in the brain, and that results in lasting and durable changes in substance use behavior. So one of the areas modulated by serotonin acting psychedelics is the mesolimbic pathway, which is associated with reward and cravings, compulsive use, and depression during withdrawal. Psychedelics are also attributed to enhanced neuroplasticity. So basically the ability of the brain to learn, adapt, and change. There's also been some really compelling work and imaging studies done with psychedelics and the default mode network, which is a group of connected brain structures that govern processes related to self-directed thought. And work there has been implicated in showing that psychedelics can affect cognitive processes like self-reflection, self-awareness, and introspection. Together working at all these different levels, psychedelics appear to restructure personality in a positive way that's enduring over time. I think okay. Next.
Yeah, I mean, I can
Okay.
jump in there a little bit as well. I think that yeah, first I want to just you know, just express my appreciation and my just the stories and that both Celeste and Janet expressed were really their courage, that to go through the process. It's not easy kind of going through these experiences, and so yeah. Yeah, I think the research is really in terms of the mechanism is really in its infancy right now, and there's many ways that we think that psychedelics work, and a lot of the structure, the things the changes that we see in the brain, it's hard to know, the chicken and the egg type thing, people have just profound experiences of connection, of introspection, of reframing their story, and all these have downstream effects, on the brain, and so yeah, I think that there's going to be a lot more coming out in terms of specific mechanisms, but I also think that people's stories are important. These people's experiences I mean, how people are experiencing these medicines are important. But getting back to the research, in terms of at least the results that we're seeing. I mean, there has been significant studies, and there more are coming, showing the end result, that psilocybin with alcohol use disorder. A big study came out 2 years ago in JAMA, where it was a relatively large study with 100 people, showed significant reductions, almost 50% reductions in heavy drinking days, and drinks per week, with a lot of people being completely abstinent. And then tobacco use, that's another big, Matt Johnson was on the seminar a few weeks ago, and I think he shared that even their bigger study that they have pretty much done but not published showed significant effects with tobacco use. And then there's also some studies with ayahuasca. And most of these studies are survey studies, surveying people who use ayahuasca, especially in the Santo Daime and UDV churches in South America, and show significant reductions or correlations with lower substance abuse, both alcohol and other substances. Ayahuasca is definitely a little bit difficult to study because it's so embedded in the traditional matrix of these South American tribes. But yeah, they're very promising. And of course, ibogaine, probably the big gun, in terms of substance abuse, mostly studied right now with opiate use disorder, but there's ongoing studies with alcohol use disorder, as well. Ibogaine is a very complex molecule, and it works in a very complex way, and which we don't really even understand how it basically obliterates opiate withdrawal. But it's really an amazing medicine.
Right. And I definitely agree. I think that one is what people just call the addiction interrupter, and the effects on opioid withdrawal are pretty much unprecedented, at least as far as I know. The one thing I will say about, for some of these, like specifically psilocybin, there have been clinical trials that have a very structured framework that involves preparation sessions. There's an administration that has like specific requirements for trained therapists, and then also a period of integration. And I know going back to some of those psilocybin studies, I think one of the aspects of the experience that was really correlated well to reductions in substance use was the quality of the mystical experience. And I read recently something now coming out more leading towards introspection as being what success, if you will, on therapy turns on.
Yeah. And of course,
Um,
the point that you brought up, the self-love, the self-compassion part is actually a part of psychedelic therapy that happens quite often, MDMA especially too, but that part of seeing oneself in this new light, this compassionate way, because there is a lot of shame that goes along with substance use, alcoholism, and it can be a self-perpetuating thing. So breaking that with kind of a type of self-compassion that one feels like in their bones, like really deep, not on a surface level, is can be super transformative. I mean, sometimes when you see something, you can't unsee it, after the medicine has worn off, that still stays with you. Yeah.
yes.
Thank you both so much for this conversation. And well, actually, Celeste, I want to give you a chance to speak on this study. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut in.
Oh,
Give a
not at
chance.
all. Right. So I think most of what we presented previously has been the result of clinical trials, or at least planned clinical trials. But then there's also some literature on surveys and interviews, things like that. So this slide is just devoted to an online survey by Johns Hopkins scientists, and it was basically reaching out to people to share certain aspects of their experience of reducing substance abuse after a psychedelic experience. So this is a really interesting paper, and I think we can share the slides after, but it goes into the intentions that people set, where they had the experience, priorities that changed in their lives, things like that. And with this one, LSD was the most commonly reported drug in cutting back or quitting a substance of abuse.
Thank you both so much. And I just want to mention to the audience, I should have said this sooner, there is a Q&A function, so do feel free to be submitting questions as we go through, and both Josh and Kevin will be, and Dr. Garris will be responding there. So please take advantage of that. And then we also do have some time blocked off at the end for Q&A. So yes, definitely encourage questions and engagement. And there's a lot more to be said there, but we want to make sure to have some time for our last two stories. So I now want to hand it over to Tim to share your story. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Tasha. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to be here and to participate in this important discussion. And many thanks to the folks that have shared their stories. Really powerful stuff. A lot in there that's familiar. So my name is Tim Spalla. I am a U.S. military veteran. I served in the 75th Ranger Regiment as an intelligence specialist, completed several deployments to Iraq between 2005 and 2009. And in that work, I always tell everyone I wasn't, one of the Rangers from the movies. I wasn't out there doing the stuff from the movies. I was kind of one of those guys behind the scenes. And I didn't realize how important that was going to be to me later on. But I'll try to describe it just a little bit and quickly in this story. So as a intelligence specialist with the Rangers, I did everything from sit behind a desk and coordinate intelligence collection activities to reading reports and identifying the locations of where terrorists and terrorist networks were operating, all the way through the spectrum of helping to coordinate kinetic airstrikes against people, vehicles, buildings, and continued further even to accompanying platoons out on missions where I would be tasked with duties ranging from searching enemies, combatants that were killed, photographing bodies, and using that information for interrogations of survivors, to include women and children. In my last couple of deployments with the regiment, I did a lot of work in detention facilities. And actually, on my last deployment, I ran a detention facility in Baghdad. At the time, it didn't really occur to me the gravity of those experiences or those responsibilities that I carried. However, when I left the military in June of 2009, it became quickly apparent to me what I was struggling with. I didn't know what PTSD was. I didn't realize, drinking myself to blackout every single night wasn't normal. I didn't realize that sadness all day long only really punctuated with anxiety and fear wasn't normal. That had just become my life. And I was to go on to spend the next decade struggling with that. And that decade took me through more of the same work as a private military contractor. I spent quite a few years in Africa, in Europe, in the Middle East, basically just doing the same thing I always did, not knowing that there was a way or there was a different way to go about existing. And it wasn't until I hit a crisis point in 2018 where a lot of what happened in Iraq and a lot of what happened throughout my life caught up with me. And I came really close to that moment of deciding I didn't want to be here anymore. And had it not been for a moment with my young child in my lap, that just utterly changed the course of my life and became the doorway that I walked through to get help, that eventually led me to Colorado in a community that I found out here of veterans who were working with psilocybin. Up until this point, nothing worked. No prescription medications, no therapy at the VA, nothing worked to get me out of this spin cycle of fear and sadness. And it was actually psilocybin and the repeated going back time after time and getting down to the depths that I was allowed to go within the embrace of psilocybin and supportive guides and a supportive community that allowed me to sit with all the things that I just could not find a way to sit with and feel all the things that I had been so terrified to feel. The comment was made earlier, working with these medicines, when you see something, you can't unsee it. And I would say another aspect of this work is, and what is accessible to us through work with natural medicines, is when you feel something, you can't unfeel it. And for me, that's what it took. Like, I literally had to go down and feel every ounce of everything that was in there and feel safe in doing it before coming back up and realizing, all right, I made it. I can do this. I can live with this. And there are other choices that I can make in my life to be able to cope with the things that have happened and move forward. And I do credit psilocybin and the work with natural medicines for getting me there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim, for sharing your story. It is deeply powerful, and it is so meaningful to me to see where you are today and the work that you're doing and the hope that that brings, I think, for you and then for the people that you work with. And I think that these stories speak to why we're making this change now, that for some people it is a matter of life and death, and I don't say that lightly. But I feel that in your story, and I'm thankful that you're here and that you've come through what you have, and to be a part of it moving forward. So thank you. All right. So the last story we have for you today is Joe's story, and I want to hand it to you, Joe. Thank you.
Gotcha. My name is Joe Stone. I live here in Westminster, Colorado. I'm a nonprofit manager. I've been doing that for the last 14 years, and formerly a Unitarian Universalist minister. I live here with my family, my wife, my 4 kids, and basically I'm just a suburban dad. And I've been living with a condition called cluster headache since I was 14 years old, so for the last 41 years. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the condition, cluster headache is considered to be some of the worst pain known to medicine, if not the worst pain known to medicine. And there's 2 types. There's chronic cluster headaches, and there's episodic cluster headaches. And I have episodic cluster headaches. And so typically my pattern is I get 2 cycles a year for between 2 and 3 months apiece, for a total of about 6 months of the year. Occasionally the cycles will extend to 5 and 6 months at a time. And I get anywhere between 1 and 5 or 6 clusters a day during that period of time. And I spent most of my life chasing down different treatments. I have tried everything under the sun and found very little relief over the years. With the exception of oxygen. Oxygen is a very, very important part of getting through the day-to-day grind of having clusters. And that has been a great benefit, but it's just an abortive. It doesn't prevent things. It doesn't make them any better. And, when I was about 25 years old, I finally got diagnosed. It took me 10 years to get diagnosed. And I still, at that point, didn't have any effective treatment. And I had just gone through a terrible cycle that lasted many months. And I was at my wit's end. And I had a gun in my mouth, and I had my finger on that trigger, and it seemed like a very reasonable thing to do at the time. So one of the other names that they call cluster headaches is the suicide headache. And there's a reason for that. There's about approximately a 20 times higher chance that someone with cluster headaches will attempt suicide during that time. Part of it is because the pain is so traumatic that there is psychological fallout. You can't expect your brain to just go along as it is after you experience repeated trauma all the time. And so the vast majority of cluster headache patients also suffer from severe traumatic stress disorders. We won't go as far to say as post-traumatic, because this is not post-traumatic stress. This is a recurring stress disorder. And so you have a condition that not only has sort of the extreme end of pain that human beings are known to experience, but also traumatic, psychological issues as well. And so it was about 4 or 5 years ago, and I was in a cycle that lasted, over 5 months. And I was in a bad place. And I had known about the idea of using psychedelics to treat cluster headaches for over 20 years. But for me, it was just not something that I was prepared to go and do. That wasn't sort of part of my lifestyle and everything else. And I avoided it. And finally, I realized that I had no choice but to try this treatment. And I went ahead and I did the treatment, and it's a little different than the treatments that you're hearing about here today, in the sense that we use what's called a sub-psychedelic dose. So it's not a microdose, it's not a macrodose, it's kind of right in between, about a gram and a half. And I tried it, and the first couple of days after I tried it, I had terrible clusters. I thought it made it worse. But I stuck it out, and I had a couple of days that were pain-free. And I did it again 5 days later. And the day after that, I was in remission. And I went and subsequently tried the therapy again during the next cycle, and it again successfully got rid of my cycle, and some subsequent times after that. It's not a perfect medicine, but in the last 40 years, it is the best medicine I have ever tried for this condition. And it has truly given me my life back. It has allowed me to, sort of act normally in the world and with my family and relationships and friends. And on top of that, it has a dual effect because it's also treating that psychological trauma that we've been hearing about today. And so it's an amazing medicine for this particular condition. There's about 300,000 people in the United States or so with cluster headaches. It's about the same as the numbers of muscular sclerosis. And one of the things that I want to sort of leave with you here today is that what we're finding is that it's not just cluster headaches that this can treat with chronic pain. It is a myriad of other conditions. And I know Tasha is going to talk about that a little bit, but I want to point people to some wonderful research. Clusterbusters.org is the nonprofit that has helped me and that I volunteer for in doing the treatments and everything. And they have research going back on treating cluster headaches with psychedelics in studies with Yale and Harvard and Johns Hopkins, the University of Texas, and others. And the data is clear. This is not snake oil. This is the real deal. And there's also another organization called the Psychedelics and Pain Association that is affiliated with Clusterbusters. And they have over 70 research papers going back for many years talking about how psychedelics can treat other chronic pain conditions as well. And so I just want to toss it over to Tasha, and maybe she could say a few things about that too.
Thank you so much, Joe. I feel like we're all going to have a good cry after this call, so I'm just going to call that out. I think everyone's feeling it. Your story is so incredible, and I just want to say, having encountered you through this work, the spirit and the presence that I feel from you, like knowing what you've lived through, it's really beautiful. And I think that, I'm just really thankful for you and for the healing that you found as well. So we wanted to include Joe's story because we know that people are finding relief and healing from psychedelics for pain conditions like cluster headaches, yet pain conditions remain underemphasized and understudied in psychedelic science. So as Joe mentioned, for those interested in learning more about psychedelics for pain, definitely check out the Psychedelics and Pain Association website, which compiles research for conditions like fibromyalgia, headache conditions, phantom leg syndrome, and more. And it also includes a free training for healthcare providers on psychedelics for pain conditions. So there's a lot there. Of course, also check out Cluster Busters. Really, they do amazing work, and we're so thankful to have connected with them and to be able to partner with them as we move forward on this policy project in Colorado. All right, so I am now going to hand it to Dr. Garris to speak a little bit about an exciting study from Stanford researchers that kind of connects to some of the different themes we've touched on. I'll hand it to you.
Yeah, let me see how to connect. Yeah, this was a very exciting. It was a very exciting paper. One that Ibogaine which is kind of a medicine that I'm really, really excited about. Is receiving more attention and more study. Each psychedelic medicine is different, and so it's a little bit hard to, but I think that the one part of this study, I think was, the one part that's similar is, Ibogaine has a very strong neuroplastic, aid medicine, and the neuroplasticity actually lasts, quite a long time. Ibogaine, the paper that was done out of Johns Hopkins, which looked at social critical periods that opened up after critical learning periods that opened up after psychedelic use, found that these critical periods were proportional to how long the psychedelic lasted. So with ketamine, it's a pretty small window, several days. But ibogaine, the ibogaine lasts the trip, can last up to 36 hours, and then the metabolite of ibogaine can actually last several months. And so that window of neuroplasticity is quite large, weeks, months, maybe. And so in this study with veterans with a lot of different things. I mean, they looked at several, people, half of them or more had PTSD, half of them had substance use disorder. They all had traumatic brain injuries, and found in all these measures that really dramatic improvements. I think one of maybe the caveat to the study is though it was only a month of follow-up, and it'd be really curious to see how long afterwards. But this study really kind of shows. I mean, it's a small study, but I think that it's showing this path forward, like how these medicines can really rechange the wiring in the brain. And I mean, I'm really curious to see how chronic pain, especially cluster headaches, what really the mechanism of action is, and is it these kind of these neuroplastic pathways. And so yeah, it's really exciting. I mean, yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Garris. Yeah, I think it's just thinking about the connection between the fact that there's potentially relief for people that have traumatic brain injuries, which from what I understand, also there's very few options that we know of really to help with traumatic brain injury. So I think the promise there, and when I think about Joe's story as well, it feels like there's this kind of neurological potential that is yet to be fully explored. So I agree with you. It's exciting. It's a small study. It's with ibogaine, and whenever we talk about ibogaine, I do think it's really important to acknowledge and highlight that ibogaine, out of all of the substances that we've mentioned, comes with specific physiological health risks, specifically cardiac risks. So it has created challenges to further study. And I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Dr. Garris, to that piece about ibogaine. I mentioned that because, as we have previously highlighted, it's not currently included in the regulated access model. It is decriminalized in Colorado. However, it's not decriminalized for sharing. And that was intentional by state regulators, not wanting people to be sharing ibogaine without the requisite clinical and medical support in place to really support people to make sure that they could have safe outcomes.
Yeah, no, you were completely correct. There's definitely a higher physiological risk with this, especially cardiac toxicity. Essentially, can induce arrhythmias in people who might be susceptible to them, and so that's why they added the magnesium actually to the ibogaine to kind of calm the electrical activity of the heart. And I do want to add that, I mean, ibogaine is one of the more obvious risks, but there are risks with all of the psychedelics, and there's maybe with psilocybin, maybe the risks are probably a little bit more on the psychological side, but there are probably physiological risks. I mean, it does raise your blood pressure. People who have uncontrolled high blood pressure can run into trouble with psilocybin, but especially the psychological risks. And so really kind of doing this in the right way, with a lot of support, with a lot of intention, mitigates that risk. It doesn't completely take it away, so just to know that sometimes sometimes trauma, especially trauma, can be kind of activated in a way, and if there's not enough support, it can be destabilizing. There's some risk in terms of bipolar or propensity to schizophrenia. There is kind of this derealization that can happen, which the Alaskan airline pilot seemed to have. So yeah, I just want to emphasize that this should not be something to undertake lightly, but the potential there, is really great. So I think that people, could consider it. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, that is really important to highlight. None of this is risk-free, and I think we, in a lot of ways, led with that in the last session. Of course, we led with the research, but we also did go into a little bit more detail about what are some of the conditions that might come with a bit higher risk, some of the medications as well. And so definitely encourage anyone who's listening to this session who didn't get a chance to see our last session. We are posting this all on our Healing Advocacy Fund YouTube channel. And we'll send out the links to the recording after the session. So please do check it out, because these are important. That's important information to have. So all right, with that, I want to bring it back to some of what came up in Tim's story. And specifically, Tim, I just wanted to ask if you could share a little bit more about the work that you do in your practice around veteran mental health and the importance of safe access for veterans.
Sure. Thank you, Tasha. And as I was listening to Dr. Garris speak, I was reminded of a question I often get asked about neuroplasticity. Like, what does that actually mean, right? Like, I have a lot of, especially veterans, coming and asking that question. What does it mean to be neuroplastic? Like, what's going to happen to my brain? And one of the ways that I feel called to say this now, like, what does that actually mean, and how do you explain it to someone? And the way I describe it is, it's a window of time where you have the ability to change beliefs and to notice labels and thoughts and the framework that you've been potentially using your entire life to understand your experiences, to understand yourself in relation to others, and importantly, yourself in relation to trauma narratives. And in that window of neuroplasticity, with the help and support of folks, certainly folks who have been there, folks who have been trained, is your opportunity to start confronting the thoughts and labels and beliefs that have not worked, and do the work of bringing in new thoughts and labels and beliefs that are maybe less punishing, less restrictive, less distressing, maybe more helpful in helping you live a life that you want, instead of a life that you're imprisoned in, which so many of us, especially veterans, feel when we come out of our experiences, whether it's military childhood or post-military. In terms of the work that I'm doing now, I work as a therapist. I'm a licensed professional counselor candidate. I feel that's important to say. I'm not fully licensed yet. I just graduated about a year and a half ago. However, it's been a lifetime journey to get to this point, and to be able to sit, especially with veterans who I have a shared experience with. For me, I know one of my biggest obstacles to getting help was the inability to trust anybody who hadn't been there. I held my trauma, I held my memories, I held my moral injury really close because I never knew when it was safe to let it out. And one of the ways that I felt unsafe to let it out was with people who just could have no understanding. If you didn't know what it smelled like, felt like, tasted like, what it looked like, then how am I possibly going to explain to you what it looked like for me to go through those experiences? And so as a therapist and also as a coach, what I have seems to be maybe the universe, I don't know, but I have a lot of people coming to me who are already working with medicines, who are already experimenting with things like microdosing. And I tell folks, you throw a rock in Denver, you're going to find somebody growing psilocybin. It's not that hard to find it. And with the environment that we are lucky enough to live in now, that's allowed. And you can experiment with these things. And for a lot of folks, once they find these medicines, then the questions start. Then the need for someone who's been there before, the ability to walk with someone who can accompany them on their journey wherever it may go. And so the work that I do now especially with veterans who find me, is if they're working with the medicines or experimenting with the medicines, or maybe they've gone off and done a retreat overseas and now they're back here and they don't know what to do with these experiences. They don't know how to integrate them into their lives in a way that seems helpful or healed. Where I kind of show up as just the guy who can help them walk through it. Unfortunately, there's no answers that I can really give anybody. However, there is empathy and compassion for what they're going to encounter as they move through this new phase of life. So often folks will come out of these experiences. I always say you're going to have a new set of eyes when you come out. A new set of eyes to be able to see the world around you, to be able to see yourself, and to be able to see opportunities to make different choices. And then how do we do that? And one of the best ways to do that is to be someone safe for them to come to when they have questions, when they make a mistake, when they don't live up to the standard that they want to live up to. Where can they go that's safe, and reveal that? If there's wounds that are down there that are still festering, that are still asking for attention, who do they go to talk to about that? And where do they go once they get down there? So that a lot of my coaching work really centers around that. And then just being ready to receive folks who find me and help them walk, because ultimately that's what it is. These medicines, I think the perception is I'm going to go do psilocybin or DMT or ibogaine and I'm just magically going to be healed. And it doesn't work that way. If these medicines do anything, they reveal what's asking to be healed. That work of healing is still on you. It's still on the journeyer. And certainly to prepare for those experiences is one kind of way of showing up for someone. Holding space for someone who is there is a different kind of component of this, but ultimately a lot of the work that takes place is in the weeks and the months and maybe even the years following these experiences. It's someone coming back into their life totally reimagined. And for a lot of veterans especially, and I am in this camp, I crawled to these medicines. I barely survived the 39 years that it took me to find them. And the path of destruction that led me there included jobs and family and the pain and suffering that I was experiencing, I spread throughout my life. All of that was waiting for me when I came out of these medicines. I had to find a way to live with it. I had to find a way to try to grow through it and try to bring as many as the people I could that I cared about in my life with me. And I needed help for that. And having the help of experienced guides and therapists who knew how to hold this space was critical for me to be able to come back into my life and truly reap the rewards of what these medicines are able to provide. So as someone now who's been through it, continues to go through it every day, I'm now at the place where I feel like that I'm capable of walking with others as they start on that journey themselves.
Thank you so much, Tim, for sharing all of that. There is so much to learn from what you've shared. And so I'm really glad we're recording this because I want to go back and deepen into that. So thank you. I want to provide a little bit, I think, of clarification here because I know we're talking about a lot of different medicines, and we're also talking about both the regulated structure, which we're creating in Colorado with the set of rules and regulations for therapeutic access to psilocybin mushrooms. And then separate from that, there's this decriminalization piece. And I think that there's the potential for a little bit of confusion there. So I guess what I want to clarify is that, people are now using mushrooms within the decriminalized context and maybe reaching out to somebody like Tim for support with integration, for support with preparation, and providing that kind of support was not illegal prior to passage of this initiative. what we've done is we've actually decriminalized people to make that choice for themselves, to pursue that. But we are simultaneously setting up a licensed regulated system where people can go and get trained at a state approved training program. So it won't be a training program that's run by the state. It'll be a training program that's approved by the state. They can become licensed, and then they can work in Colorado as a licensed facilitator, which is a new profession that we're creating in the state of Colorado. And that profession won't come online, so to speak, until early 2025. So at the end of this year, the state of Colorado is going to open up the opportunity for people to apply for those licenses. People can start getting trained to be a facilitator before that time. And then people can become fully licensed in 2025. So, sorry, I am recovering from a cold. So in 2025, we are going to be seeing healing centers open where people can go and access these therapies. I just really wanted to spell that out because I don't want there to be undue confusion about these different pieces that we're sort of threading together. I also want to mention that at least one of the substances that has been brought up on this call, LSD or acid, is not legal in the state of Colorado. That's not a judgment about LSD or its capacity for healing. It simply wasn't included in Proposition 122. So I just want to mention that because we don't want to be, misleading anyone as to the current law in the state of Colorado. So a few pieces there. We also have, again, Josh Capel on the call with us and holding it down in the Q&A, who brings a lot of legal expertise and was one of the drafters of the law in Colorado. So if you do have questions on the legal side, please do put them in the chat. That's part of what the goal is here, is to have a chance to answer your questions. And Josh is brilliant and has not all the answers, but he's got a lot of them. Before we open it up fully for Q&A, I want to touch on a last piece here. There are some questions that came up at the last session about equity and access. So I just want to highlight some pieces of the law in Colorado that are intended to support equity and access, and also acknowledge where questions still remain. So access to psilocybin therapies in Colorado within the regulated model will not require a diagnosis or prescription. And that's done intentionally, recognizing that people are finding relief and healing from a whole range of different conditions, and also people that don't have conditions, but are looking for, or don't have, diagnosed conditions, but are looking for healing. And want to be able to have this experience. So that's for anyone who's over 21 and over, will be able to access in the regulated model. The law also allows for group sessions, which can provide more affordable access, and also offers the opportunity to heal in relationship with others, which can actually offer its own really powerful element to this entire process and experience. So it's both an equity piece, and then it can be a part of the healing, treatment, and recovery piece as well. Telehealth will also be an option for preparation and integration, though the psychedelic experience itself will not be something that can be done through telehealth. There will need to be a licensed facilitator present throughout the entire experience. The regulated model in Colorado will not require a separate professional license or degree in order to become a facilitator with psilocybin therapies. In other words, you do not need to be a licensed clinician, psychotherapist, physician in order to become a natural medicine facilitator. You just need to complete that training and successfully apply for a license through the state. Again, that was done as an equity piece, and also reflecting the diverse pathways to developing the skills to support people in the psychedelic experience, including the importance of lived experience, which I think Tim spoke to really powerfully as well, recognizing that there is a piece of the presence to support someone in their psychedelic journey that can come from having your own past history with trauma, shared identities, and these other pieces. So really trying to expand the opportunity for that to become an element of this healing in Colorado. And then finally, I think it's worth highlighting that the law specifically legalized mushrooms in their natural form. It did not legalize synthetic versions of the psychedelic compounds. So these medicines cannot be patented, and this is not a pharmaceutical model. Okay, I will add one more piece. So there are still a lot of challenges in relation to equity and access, and the biggest one remains federal illegality of natural medicines. And it's important to highlight that every substance we've mentioned today on the call remains illegal federally in the United States. We have only legalized within the state of Colorado within this therapeutic access context, and then we've decriminalized in the state of Colorado. So there's a lot of questions around insurance reimbursement for access to psilocybin, including Medicaid coverage. And while the intent of the measure is to allow for Medicaid reimbursement, the pathway to get there remains unclear while mushrooms remain a Schedule I substance federally. And more broadly, in terms of insurance reimbursement in the long term, it really will be necessary to continue to develop and build this body of evidence that shows the safety and efficacy within the state-regulated model, which is a little bit different from the clinical research model. So one of the important things going forward is going to be for the state to have a mechanism to really understand the impact of this access and also the safety. So how many harmful or adverse events are occurring, and then how many people are accessing services to be able to understand really what is the safety profile within this program that we're creating. So those are a few pieces on equity and access. We've got about 20 minutes left here on the call, which is what we were aiming for Q&A. So I want to move into the Q&A section. I'm actually wondering, Kevin, if you would want to jump in and kind of and manage which questions we choose, partially because, as I mentioned, I'm recovering from a cold. That cold is COVID. I'm recovering from COVID, so I'm just gonna like take a step back and let Kevin kind of take it from here. So thank you again, everyone, so much.
Thank you, Tasha. Yeah, and folks, just again, feel free to drop any questions in the Q&A. And I see that Josh right now is answering one question from Marilyn Marchetti. Will the new healing centers be regulated similarly to Oregon, or will it be more like a clinically regulated program? And Josh is currently working on that answer right now. I think another question here is, can you clarify how long the training programs will be to become a licensed facilitator? And Tasha, you may want to jump in on that one.
I can jump in.
Yeah,
I also
cool.
got to kind of clear my throat, so I'm doing
Okay.
great.
Great.
Yeah, so the specific rules of the program are not finalized. We are going to see draft rules for the regulated access program within probably the next weeks to month, I would say. So we'll know more about the training program requirements then. The last number that I've seen floated on the Natural Medicine Advisory Board, which is a 15-person advisory board that is providing recommendations to the state of Colorado to set up this model, is 150 hours of didactic training plus a 40-hour practicum. And in addition to those two pieces, a 6-month training license, during which time somebody would begin to be able to practice, but they must do so in consultation with somebody who either is themselves a licensed facilitator or is a distinguished educator, which would be a separate license, basically allowing somebody to provide that consultation and mentorship during the training license period. The period of 6 months would also require an additional around 30 hours of consultation with kind of requirements for the different aspects that would be touched on. So there would be an emphasis within that on ethics and working through some of the ethically challenging pieces that might come up as people begin their practice. So none of that is finalized yet. We are going to talk a lot more about training on this in the session on February 28th. It's the whole session's about training. So definitely encourage you to come back out for that. But that's to give you a little teaser of what it might look like. We'll know more by the next session because I think we'll have seen draft rules by then.
And I'll add one quick note with all of that is that for folks who've signed up on the Department of Revenue's website to be informed about upcoming public process meetings, there was actually an email that came out just this afternoon where Department of Revenue they announced their permanent rulemaking schedule announcement. So they're going to be doing a sequence of public meetings for folks to either attend, some in person, they're all virtual. So folks, if you go to the Natural Medicine Division's website, simple Google search for Josh, help me out here. I think it's or Tasha, losing my train of thought here. The Natural Medicine Division within DOR. You can sign up for the mailing list and you will get notified of upcoming sessions and meetings like this. And so they're having meetings through, looks like actually the first meeting is on March 20th, and they're talking about licensing and application requirements and procedures at that one. And they have meetings all the way through July 9th, 2024. I'll drop a link to the division homepage there.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm going to drop a link, and then we can also make a note of trying to include some of these resources in our follow-up email, which we're sending these follow-up emails with a lot of links and resources for those of you who really want to dive in a bit deeper. All right. I'm seeing
Another
a
good one
question
here. Go ahead, Tasha. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm seeing a question, how will the medications be accessed in Colorado? So within the regulated access model, essentially somebody who's 21 and up will be able to reach out to a licensed healing center or potentially a licensed facilitator to inquire about access. From that point, there's going to be some sort of safety assessment. So the facilitator or somebody affiliated with the healing center will meet with that person, discuss their health history, some of the factors that might come into play that could increase their risk, so that everybody's on the same page about what that person's specific risk profile might be, and then together make a choice whether that person should move forward with the with access to psilocybin. There could be a couple conditions that could be exclusionary, but that isn't determined yet. So I don't really want to speak on that, at least for this session. I think we'll know more when we see the final rules and regulations. But assuming that this moves forward, then the facilitator would have a preparation session with that person, during which time they would talk through their intent for the session, some of the things that they're working on, some of the challenging things that might come up, and help them prepare for the fact that sometimes these experiences are really hard. They're not always, as we heard on the last session, rainbows and butterflies. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. Following the preparation session, the facilitator would then be with the person throughout their psychedelic experience, and then there will be integration afterwards. In terms of how the natural medicines themselves get to the participant, in Oregon, there's a rule that a facilitator cannot handle psilocybin mushrooms. So somebody else that's affiliated with in Oregon, they're called service centers. Somebody else affiliated with the service center would actually hand the person the medicine. In Colorado, again, that's not totally clear yet. We might not have that prohibition on facilitators handling the natural medicine, so the facilitator might be able to directly provide it. And then in addition to all these other pieces I've mentioned, we will have a state licensing process for cultivation and manufacture of the psilocybin mushrooms themselves that will be then provided to the healing centers and facilitators.
Not seeing any new questions in the chat right now. There's one that we just talked about, and Josh is also typing an answer to.
Okay. Well, feel free to keep them coming. I do think we'll give a moment in case people have some in the works. I think while we give a chance for folks to consider if they have more questions, Kevin and I came up with just a couple open-ended questions for our panelists to jump in if you would like to. So the first one is, what's the promise you see with the Natural Medicine at Health Act in Colorado? And what outcomes do you hope for, especially as the regulated program begins next year? So I'm just putting that as an open-ended question to anyone on the call. And feel free to jump in.
I'll take it. I think the promise is really clear. The ability to choose, personal agency. For some of us, the Western medical model has a lot of benefits, but it doesn't quite get us all the way. And that's not the same for everybody. But I know in my case, some of the injuries that I was carrying around, we talk a lot about PTSD, but what folks often miss with PTSD is the moral guilt kind of criterion of PTSD. And when I think about the experiences in my life that were traumatic, what lingers from them is the guilt and shame. And for those who are maybe not familiar with the concept of moral injury, this has became a really deep focus of my PhD research and has since really become a focus of a lot of my work, especially in this space. Moral injury is a soul wound. And whether or not you believe in souls and those kinds of things, the reality is it is so much deeper than any other wound, at least that I've experienced. Moral injury is not just isolated to the veteran community, it's in healthcare, it's the research shows it's literally across the spectrum of human experiences. Perpetration, complicity, and betrayal. There is no medication for that. And even the therapies that are out there now are really not all that effective. And what I found, the doorway down to the level where those injuries actually lived was through natural medicines. I had to get underneath ego. I had to get underneath framework. I had to get to a depth where I could sit with those things and actually accept them and then move forward with them and integrate them into my life in a way that wasn't as punishing to me or those that I loved and cared about. So when you talk about natural medicines and where the state of Colorado is going, I feel viscerally that the promise is agency. For someone who is walking into the VA or a prescriber or psychiatrist, whoever it is, and they are just sad and lonely with it, and I'll say it again, there is no prescription for that. You have to actually go down there, and these medicines allow you a doorway to get to that depth. And for Colorado to make that space, make that doorway available for people, I think of all the lives that are going to be transformed, all the families that are going to be saved, and the list goes on and on and on. So for me, it's just the promise is totally and utterly there, and I'm very fortunate to be living in this state at this time, and to have folks like Kevin and Tasha and Dr. Garris and all the others who are making this thing possible for me and the hundreds of thousands of veterans that I hope are following, and will find their way out here soon.
Thank you so much, Tim. I'm going to hold a moment for anyone else to speak if you would like to. No pressure, but want to just offer that space.
I kind of wanted to jump off of what Tim said in giving people more agency. I think it's also going to lead into an expansion of consciousness that's really totally absent from the conversation of Western healthcare, which involves, throwing a Band-Aid on something or going to a doctor and getting a pill, and that pill solves all the problems for you. This is a totally different paradigm where you have to put work in and things don't just change overnight. And it really requires going through a lot of depth and getting to know yourself, getting to know the world around you, just really expanding on things. So that's one piece that I'm really excited for. And also just more educational resources. I feel like Colorado would lead the way with showing people how to effectively maximize the benefits of these medicines.
Thank you, Celeste. Were you wanting to jump in, Dr. Garris? Okay.
Yeah, just to piggyback a little bit. I mean, one, I really do agree with Celeste. I mean, I think I've been struggling, personally with Western medicine for a while, actually probably since medical school. But yeah, just getting to root issues, like, I mean, the root, and then bringing this vocabulary that Tim was bringing into, like, soul and spirit and this deep wounding. And I mean, I think that that there is the medicalized kind of way of looking at it and the receptors and all that stuff, but when you look at the publication that have come out talking about the actual narratives about how people see the whole experience, it brings in these deeper concepts of connection and spirituality, and it just now becoming part of the people are talking about it in medical journals, and we're all like thinking about it, and thinking about these illnesses or psychiatric kind of conditions in a much deeper way than we have in the past. And then I do think that the ability to kind of access these medicines in a safe way and in a very informed way is also something I really hope that the Health Act can facilitate.
Thank you, Dr. Garris. Janet, did you want to jump in? Oh, I saw you unmuted.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute. Yeah, I think I was agreeing with all of that. I was kind of sitting there listening to everybody's answers, and I'm saying, if all the people that wanted to have access to this medicine, safe access to this medicine, could actually do it, like, wouldn't we all just be so happy and so connected? And like, when you get to go deeper in yourself, you can see that other people want and need that too, but they don't necessarily know how to do it. And I think that having the access to this medicine would allow people, well, first of all, once it becomes a little more destigmatized, I think, in a way too, right? We can have, when we have the access, and say, hey, you know what? Like, the kind of the way that when I think about it, I think about how when I was growing up, no one really talked about therapy so much. Like, there was this thing about going to therapy. It's like no one talks about it, right? But they're all doing it, or they're afraid of it, whatever it is. And then now everybody, I mean, I have people sending me text messages, oh, I'm at my therapist, I'll catch you later, like that type of thing, right? If we could get to that point with the use of psychedelics in a way that feels safe for everybody, and it's commonplace enough where people don't feel like they have to have hide it from anybody, and say, I'm working deeper on myself, making it open to everybody so that other people feel, okay, this is like a place that I can go, and this is something I can do. I really feel like this will help with that. It will help people be connected to themselves more, which will then allow them to connect to other people even better.
So appreciate you all and each of the answers that you just gave. We only have a couple minutes left on the webinar. We do have a couple of questions in the chat. There's a question about rural access, which is really important. I don't feel like I have time to really do it justice here, but I will mention that Colorado passed Proposition 122 as a matter of statewide concern. Communities cannot ban healing centers in their jurisdictions, and this is in recognition of this being passed as a mental health initiative. So people should be able to have their own agency, as Tim mentioned, in choosing the mental health option that's right for them. Communities can set time, place, and manner, and there will be rules around zoning. So that's something to keep an eye out in our community, in our communities across the state. And then in terms of the rural access piece, there have been some really amazing advocates participating in the process with the Natural Medicine Advisory Board, raising this and bringing it to the front over and over again. I actually want to call out one person in particular, Erica Messenger, who's a nurse in Southwest Colorado, who's been really amazing on making sure that that is centered, but there's still a need for more voices. So I do encourage you to follow up in the resources that we send and engage. And we're here to support you in engaging in advocacy for access in your community, not just in terms of whether or not this is allowed, but actually how do we create a model where it can logistically and feasibly be accessible in rural locations, which isn't easy to do, but it is absolutely crucial. So thank you for raising that. We've only got a minute left. So I'm just going to take this time to remind everyone that this is the second in a 4-part series. We have 2 more sessions. The next one is on February 8th. It's specifically all about training, and we're also bringing in some folks from Oregon where they have already launched their regulated access program. So that's a really great learning opportunity. And then the last section is going to be talking about integrated access and communities of care. So thinking a little bit more broadly about how this can be integrated with other mental health support, such as peer support programs, and our existing addiction treatment and other locations that exist in Colorado. So we're really so deeply thankful to all of our panelists for joining us today, for those of you who have joined us in the audience, and I just really look forward to continuing to be in this process of learning and creation with you all as our state embarks on this new adventure together. So thank you again.
Thank you.